I'm Robert Talisse, and this is my colleague,
Scott Aikin.
And we're philosophy professors at Vanderbilt University. Welcome to Philosophy15. We are the authors, as you might have heard, of this book, Why We Argue and How We Should, A Guide to Political Disagreement. What we do here is we engage in unscripted philosophical conversation for 15 minutes per episode, no more than 15 minutes per episode. If more than 15 minutes, maybe only a little bit more than 15 minutes. And today, we want to talk a little bit about the APA's newly released. The APA is the American Philosophical Association. It's the main scholarly academic association for philosophers in America, in North America, and elsewhere. Anyway, the APA released a statement today in support of public philosophy. Now, Scott and I think, are at this very moment, perhaps at the moment you're watching this even, we're engaged in public philosophy.
Right. Public philosophy is happening.
Yeah, public philosophy is happening.
Maybe
I think. However, Scott and I are also on record as being
not so sure as to what it is,
or
or what its value is,
or whether its value should be touted by professional organizations. Or how precisely to characterize it.
Right.
So we've got worries about public philosophy.
Yeah, we got questions. Let's take a quick look at the APA statement, and I think that we'll also have a link to it in the on the YouTube site. But here's sort of the highlights. The American Philosophical Association values philosophers' participation in the public arena. This includes work that engages in contemporary issues. So that's one way that they're defining what public philosophy is, as well as work that brings traditional philosophies to non-traditional settings. Public philosophy may also bring the discipline into dialogue with other humanities, the arts, natural sciences, social sciences, and interested people outside of academia. The APA encourages, a little further on, encourages departments, colleges, and universities to recognize public philosophy as a site of scholarly involvement. To that end, the APA encourages institutions to develop standards for evaluating and practices for rewarding public philosophy and decisions regarding promotion, tenure, and salary, so that faculty members are interested in this work may, if they choose, pursue it with appropriate recognition and without professional discouragement or penalty. They also want us to do peer-reviewed articles, but we also urge institutions to consider broadening their standards for evidence of excellence in research and teaching, and to consider whether their faculty's work in public philosophy is more properly counted as contributing to these latter categories of faculty evaluation, such as publication. So the question is, what exactly are we? First off, the question is, what is the APA really encouraging here? Are they looking for a fourth category that people can opt in on? Is it
for career advancement?
For career advancement? Is it we have on the one hand the APA wanting to playing the definitional game, right? It looks like public philosophy is talking about current events. Philosophers talking about current events that the public cares about, or philosophy having something to do with other disciplines in the academy or outside the academy. Going into areas where philosophy hasn't shown up before.
So it does look like the very first thing about the philosophy engaging with other humanities disciplines or other disciplines as such. I wonder if that doesn't render Saul Kripke a public philosopher. Linguists take his work seriously, right? I wonder if philosophers working on very technical aspects of mathematical logic are not, in virtue of that work, which engages mathematicians, doing public philosophy. So on the one hand, it looks as if one of the ways in which public philosophy is characterized is as work being done by philosophers that engages outside scholarly communities outside of the scholarly community of philosophers. I don't know who's not a public... Isn't everybody a public philosopher now?
At least potentially so, right? I mean, that's the other thing, is that you might say there's the speech act element, right? And then there's the uptake element.
Well, that's right.
And so one possibility is, yeah, you could have somebody who does things that have the potential to change other disciplines.
You don't have to. It doesn't say you have to change it,
or have any uptake with it. Right? It just
Right.
doesn't even have any uptake. Right? You can just do things that have the potential to have relevance to them.
right?
But you're like, well, but they just weren't listening. It was crickets on the other side. Is that public philosophy?
Right.
I do lots of stuff in ancient philosophy. There was like, man, it'd be great if the classicists would pay attention, but they don't. But they don't.
Yeah, well,
okay.
because not every other discipline values engagement with people outside of its discipline.
That's right. That's first.
So
one.
it's like you
Yeah.
could do all kinds of things. Like the philosophers of biology might not get a lot of uptake among the biologists. I mean, some of them might.
Some may,
Some of them
right.
do, but
Yeah.
they
Some
might
don't.
not get. But it's not because of the work isn't reaching out to them or engaging with them. It's because the biologists don't care much about philosophers.
Right. And
But those philosophers who do work on some very particular issue, let's say, within philosophy of biology, or philosophy of physics, or philosophy of chemistry, that is of its very nature, right, accessible to only chemists. If that work does in fact engage and gets the uptake, that's public philosophy?
let's take another look at the sentence.
Did I misunderstand?
Yeah, maybe. Okay, public philosophy may also bring the discipline of dialogues with other humanities, the arts, natural sciences, social sciences, and interested people outside of academia. So, yeah, so it looks like we've got certain other institutional elements that you say, yeah, right. I'm big in the English department. It counts as public philosophy, or right, the mathematicians love my stuff. That counts as public philosophy.
But then it just looks like
It looks like business as usual, by the way. So that's the first thing.
Philosophers, what philosophers do is, at least, no matter what they do, what philosophers
Potentially
do is potentially
relevant
public philosophy.
To something, right? Yeah.
So it's not clear what being in dialogue with is.
That brings traditional philosophies to non-traditional settings. Public philosophy may also bring the discipline into dialogue. Right. So maybe just philosophy of, and then you just fill in the blank, puts it into dialogue in one sense.
Right. So on the one hand, it looks like this is a. This looks like a problematic statement on the one hand because it looks like that statement, bringing dialogue into any other discipline, looks like it's too inclusive.
Right.
Everything now counts as public philosophy, even the work of persons who have no
Doing philosophy of language.
Yeah, right,
like
right,
doing
right.
high, deep, elbow deep, high analytic philosophy of language now counts as public philosophy.
right.
Why?
If
Because
linguists read, if it's in conversation with what
Right.
linguists are doing,
Right.
which it is.
Yeah.
So,
So that seems very strange.
so Jerry Fodor, Jerry Katz,
Right.
Metaphysics
That's a
of Meaning.
That's a better example.
Right, yeah, Jerry Katz's Metaphysics of Meaning, great book for philosophy of language. Very engaged deeply with work in linguistics. Who knew? That's a major work of public philosophy.
Well, I guess the other issue is major, but
Deeply engaged
Right, yeah.
with
Right.
linguists
So-
and semantic issues about psychology.
So yeah, I think that the boundary issue as to what counts as public philosophy is just all nothing but head scratching. I mean, we could do the exact same thing with taking up with public events, right?
So what's the point of a statement then? I mean, that's the. I'm sorry, that's the thing.
Well, no, I think that this is. But I
Am I
think
too
that's
cranky
exactly
about
it.
this?
The answer is going to be yes. But I think that it's okay to be cranky about it. Why? Because, look, we get a lot of pressure to do public philosophy internal to the discipline. A lot of folks are talking about it, and I think that there's even a lot of, from the folks who think of themselves as doing a lot of public philosophy, do a lot of browbeating of those of us who don't talk a lot about the public philosophy. And part of it is the fact that, look, I mean, it's clear that the discipline needs people front and center and being good examples and being folks who people in the public can look to and say, yeah, I know what philosophy is. It looks like that something like that is important for the discipline to just stay alive. There's a kind of a Straussian thought to that, by the way, right? Which is that even in dark times, philosophy needs to be able to find places where it's safe. And so sometimes we need people front and center to just make sure that the powerful don't crush us like bugs. But that's that's the darkest view. I think that there are other views where you could say, like, look, philosophy humanizes you. Philosophy is something that educates you and makes you a more complete person. And philosophy won't make you too weird. I think that I'm the new director of undergraduate studies. I've already gotten emails from parents about how weird being a philosophy major is going to make their daughters and sons, but. They're gonna come home. Vegetarian?
Well, maybe. So there's that. So the worry is, on the one hand, it looks like this statement is too permissive. It
yes.
encapsulates
right,
everything.
It's too wide.
On the other hand, though, the rest of the statement
about the professional advancement issue,
might be problematic in a different way.
Yeah.
I take it that the explanation for some professional philosophers' lack of public-facing engagement has an explanation in something other than a pernicious, old-fashioned conception of what the philosopher or the academic's role is. I'll give one example. It's not. Some people have complained about John Rawls, the most important political philosopher of the 20th century, having no actual public engagement, didn't write letters to the editor, didn't do any of the things that you might think that one of the most important political philosophers, theorists of justice in the century would have been engaged in.
Right. And John Dewey is usually the counterpoint.
Yeah.
Right.
Turns out that John Rawls had a crippling stutter. And this is why he didn't engage in these things. And had anxiety about it as well. This is also why Rawls's lectures on social and political philosophy and moral philosophy are now published as books. It's because the way he was able to conduct his classes was by writing out the lectures and reading them. So there was a kind of explanation of his lack of social engagement that doesn't admit of a explanation of the kind that devalues or disvalues public engagement. And I worry that the calls to expand in tenure and promotion decisions the concept of scholarship and teaching and service might not have the effect of encouraging the thought that that kind of public-faced engagement should be understood as more than just something that counts in those directions for promotion and tenure, but should be understood as one of the requirements for promotion and tenure. I just wonder about people who are stricken with anxieties about or real well-placed concerns about their ability to communicate their ideas or to present themselves in a public forum.
Yeah. I for the most part, I totally agree with this. One of the reasons why the philosophy classroom is so appealing is because of the fact that you could say, look, you've already got people who are antecedently interested in this and are kind of down with the program already. Public philosophy puts you out there and makes you vulnerable to many, many different slings and arrows, and people respond pretty profoundly differently in the public whenever you do public philosophy than if you're just in a classroom or you're writing for your academic peers. And some folks, it's not just because they've got social anxiety. Some folks just see the fact that, like, look, I've got views that might make me a target for a lot of really vicious responses, and I don't want the idiot's veto on the things that I have to say.
Right. So I wonder if it wouldn't be better to explicitly acknowledge that whatever the value is of public philosophy or philosophers engaging with public audiences on matters of public concern, or philosophers engaging with public audiences about philosophical topics, however one characterizes it, I wonder if it's necessary, I suspect that it is, that we have to recognize a division of labor in this case.
Right.
There's some people who should just not be encouraged to do those things.
Yeah, right.
For the sake of the public philosophy itself.
And
right?
for the sake of the public philosophy, and for the sake of the discipline. Some folks, you're like, I'm sure we all have colleagues, or we've all had teachers, where it's like, that's the last person who should be giving a public lecture.
Yeah, I worry about I worry about the overlap between the people who ought to go back to the library and do their scholarly work, and the people who are advocating for public philosophy. Maybe we'll just end it there.
Someone got really cranky.